I think it's really important to understand that relationships take more than one person, right? And so you can't have a healthy relationship unless you both are able to be in it. And what that means is that you have to be able to express and advocate for yourself while still making room for the other person.
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of Next Level University, where we teach you how to level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. Today, we'll be talking a lot about love, I believe. We have a very special guest. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, owner of A Better Life Therapy, author of the soon-to-be book, I Want This to Work, coming out November 30th. And you might know her at Liz Listens on Instagram, the one and only Elizabeth Earnshaw. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
You are very welcome. So before we go next level with our questions, can you just tell the listeners, what does a licensed marriage and family therapist do?
That's a really good question. So we do all of the things that any other therapist does. We are trained to treat individuals with any mental health concerns that they have. But we are also trained to understand what's called systems, which means the way in which people interact and engage with each other. So a huge focus that we have when we're working with people is what is going on in their relationships? What are their relationship skills like? How are they feeling in relationships? And that is what we love to focus on.
All right, so let's go there. Let's go there right off the bat. Yeah. So we're recording this episode a couple days, well, maybe a week after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, get around their family and they tend to revert to an older version of themselves because I don't think all of our families know who we actually are. Mm-hmm. How do you go about setting kind but strong boundaries with families, with close friends, with valued relationships?
It's a really good question. And like you said, when we go into relationships, we tend to revert back to who we were in those relationships when they were the strongest or at their prime. And a fun word to take away from this is that's called homeostasis. So our groups love to keep us the same, and they don't like it when we change because that means they have to change. So anytime you go into something with a group that you used to be more a part of, they're going to want you to go back into what you were before. Totally normal, which is why it also makes it really, really hard to set limits. And it can make you walk away feeling like you've done something wrong because that group is going to do anything they can to get you to be who you were, because it's just easier. It takes less energy to deal with you if they know what to expect. So I think the most important thing is to know that it's normal. And if you walk into it knowing this is normal, it's going to be a fight that I have to, and we don't really want to fight, but it's going to be something that I have to deal with, then that's the first step. The second step is thinking about what is it that you need. You know, you're not just setting boundaries and limits with people just for the heck of it. You're doing it because there's actually something you need within it. And if you can identify what that thing is that you need, it becomes a little bit easier to express it to other people. And so if you go into a situation and you say, you know, when I go into these situations, people bring up X, Y, and Z, and I don't like to talk about it. My question would be, why? Like, what do you want in that situation? What do you need? And what people might come up with is, well, what I need is to feel like my privacy is being respected. Or what I need is to have a day where I'm not thinking about an upsetting event. So I don't want to talk about the fact that, let's say I'm having a tough time getting pregnant or something like that. So I need comfort. I need privacy. When you can lean into that, again, it becomes easier to express because you can say to your family members, hey, you know, I really don't want to talk about this thing because today I just want to have a break from all of that. Or it's really important that that thing I shared with you is kept private. So you have those words to share. Now, you also have to brace yourself for how other people respond, which you can't control. And so the piece there is that you have to know what you'll do. Sometimes we get caught up in trying to control what other people do, but we actually need to pay attention to what we're going to do about it.
It's very interesting because I never really think boundaries and vulnerability. But what you're saying there is you kind of have to be vulnerable about the way you're feeling so you can give somebody an extra reason. That's very interesting, Alan, because usually I think of boundaries as being like steadfast and standing up for yourself. So that's a good little reframe for me.
Yeah, and I think the best way we stand up for ourselves is actually sometimes when we're vulnerable, right? Because it's truly connected to what we think and we feel about ourselves and our needs. And then we're less likely to give in to somebody questioning us. Because if it makes sense for you, it's going to be a lot easier to share what you need.
And you talked on your Instagram about this on IGTV about narrating your feelings. Can you go into that for our listeners? Because I think when I was watching that video, it was like, oh, interesting. Okay, so that's how you identify how you're feeling, and it kind of takes you out of it a little bit, and it's less, maybe more comfortable for people to think about it that way. Can you go into that for our listeners?
Yeah. So are you talking about where I talked about sometimes if you don't know what to do in a conversation, you can kind of narrate what's happening for you internally, and it can help
100%.
to diffuse the situation a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah. So a fun hack is that when you're in conflict with another person and it starts to get heated and you don't know what else to do, what can sometimes be really powerful at, first of all, getting you connected with yourself, but also kind of disarming the other person, is to narrate what's happening inside instead of trying to talk about the topic you're talking about. So what that might sound like is that if you and I are arguing and I am noticing myself getting heated, that I actually say to you, I am noticing myself getting really angry right now, and I can't even say anything else because I'm so upset, and it's making me want to walk out of the room right now, or it's making me want to yell at you, Mom, and I don't want to yell at you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk away. So just narrating this experience, what that can do is it can help you identify what you're feeling, what you're thinking. It can help you figure out the action you need to take, but it also lets the other person have insight into what's actually happening for you.
And this is for the listeners for sure, because this is something that I know Alan and I have both seen a lot with our listeners. How does self-worth affect a relationship dynamic? So if you go into a relationship and you have a low level of self-worth, how does that, and again, it's kind of a generalization, but from your experience, what have you seen that happens when somebody has a low level of self-worth versus accurate or high level?
Yeah. So when people have a low level of self-worth, they don't see themselves accurately, right? So one thing that gets impacted is their ability to express what they need or to set boundaries, because they don't really believe necessarily that what they're thinking is true. Right? Maybe I don't need to ask for that. Maybe I don't deserve privacy. Maybe I'm wrong about how I'm thinking or feeling about something. And so they are more likely to become passive in their relationships and not necessarily assert themselves. And what then happens is that the relationship becomes imbalanced. So when you have a low self-worth, you're more likely going to end up in a relationship where either, and honestly, it could happen in the other direction too, where you become really aggressive because you don't know how to state your needs in a neutral way because you don't feel good about yourself. So it comes out sideways. But what tends to happen then is that either you and what you think and what you need, that doesn't get taken seriously within the relationship, or because you have this low self-worth, you're not able to actually take in what the other person is actually thinking or needing or saying. You might steamroll them, or you might pull away from actually getting to know them and allowing them to be vulnerable. So either they stop mattering or you stop mattering, but ultimately the relationship is not balanced between the two people.
And would you say more often than not, self-worth, confidence, self-esteem, like all of those things come from conditioning, like at the end of the day, right? So how do you, and you used kind of a phrase that I was going to ask. I know some people who tend to attract negative relationships, and I think it's because they have a lower level of self-worth, right? How do you put a stop to conditioning? Alan and I always say, how do you know if your normal is normal?
Yes.
Like how do you know? So what advice do you have to people who may have a very low level of self-worth because they've been told they're not enough, they're not smart enough, they're not good enough, they're not enough? How do you start to break that cycle and figure out like who you really are as a person?
It's a really good question. How do we know if normal is normal, right? Because what we grow up in is our normal. So if we're growing up and we are being conditioned by family or society or whoever it is that we're not good enough, or that when we speak up, we get in trouble, or that if we behave well, then we get love, and the only way to get love is to be perfect all the time, or whatever it is, then that is going to actually be normal to us. We're not going to feel that there's anything different out there because the only felt sense that we have is that experience. And so when we go out into the world, we might have these blinders on where we're not even recognizing the areas in which we're not being treated the right way, or the areas in which we're not advocating for our needs. And so something that I think is so incredibly important is really taking time to look back at your own narrative, your own relational narrative. And what that means is going back as far as childhood and really exploring things like, what were relationships like for me growing up? Did I feel safe in the relationships? How was I rewarded in them? Did people support me? Did people put me down? What were feelings like in those relationships? And then going through the relationships you've had in your life and noticing, what patterns are there? What am I feeling good about? What am I not feeling good about? And building that awareness of who you are relationally, that self-awareness, can then help you to decide if there's any changes you want to make.
So I have 5 different things written down here, but the first one that I want to bring up is, what are the most common mistruths? Because Kevin and I coach people all over the world. We're very blessed at this point to interview people all over the world. We see a lot of patterns, and we see a lot of common beliefs that people carry. And one of them in particular, we were just reviewing before this about finance and about the long-term compound effect of small percent growth over time, and how little people understand that. And realizing that their decision-making paradigm would be completely different if they just understood that one thing. In relationships in particular, what do you find is like a mistruth that is just consistently in relationships, that is just, for lack of better phrasing, messing with people, where they could now think more accurately and actually be set up for success?
Yeah, a huge one. And I hope I'm answering this correctly. But I think a huge thing that causes people problems is they get really caught up in topic differences instead of actually learning how to have better processes in their conversations. So when I meet with couples, they'll say things like, well, we argue over finances. I don't think we have the same values. Maybe we can't be together because we parent so differently, like all of these types of things. And so there's this huge belief that we're supposed to go into relationships and like align on everything, which is hugely problematic because you are not going to align on the majority of the issues that you come across in life. You're just not. You're two different human beings, and the probability that you would meet somebody else who thinks the same about finances, sex, kids, where you should live, how you should exercise, how you should hang out with people, how you should eat, like all of that is impossible. You're not going to meet somebody else that thinks the same as you and believes the same. That what actually makes a relationship work is that you have the capacity to accept differences, and that you have the capacity to hold on to yourself and say, this is my opinion on that, while also letting in room for influence and the ability to dialogue around that so you can create creative solutions. You can come up with ways to solve the problem that honors both people. People are so used to individualism that they don't know how to be in relationships. So they try to navigate their problems in win-lose. And it's like, I need to convince you that my way is the best way and we're going to do it this way. And if I can't convince you to do it that way, then we're not going to move forward. But what you actually need to do is think of new ways that you've never even thought of before to navigate most of life's problems.
Yeah, the win-win solution, and the innovation of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Yeah, that's so important.
Liz, I was, and again, Alan went through your Instagram, I went through your Instagram, and we look for like different things that catch our eyes, and it's like, I'd really like to go deeper on that. I know growing up for me, and this is something you would hear all the time, relationships are 50-50. It's like it's 50-50. It's equal. And I can tell you from a business perspective, Alan and I do things differently. He might do 80% of this, I might do 20% of this, whatever. Can you talk about the importance of understanding that when your partner is down, it's kind of your responsibility, and maybe you have a different word than I, but it's kind of your responsibility to carry the weight of the load, and 50-50 isn't realistic in real life. Can you go into that?
Yeah. So that's another great untruth. We go into relationships thinking this 50-50 thing. And oh my gosh, I meet with so many couples who are so caught on that. Like, this is supposed to be 50-50 and it's not.
Right.
And we need to make it this way. And like you said, in any relationship, a friendship, a business relationship, romantic, they're not 50-50. What research has shown is that it actually matters that they feel fair. And so when you just talked about your relationship together, it feels fair, right? It feels fair maybe that someone navigates all the finance stuff and that 100% is on them because you know that they're really good at it. It's easier for them. They are, they like it more, whereas somebody else is taking on maybe 75% over here. And so it makes sense. And it's so important, especially in romantic relationships, that you're looking towards what is fair instead of getting caught on this 50-50 thing, because it's not going to be 50-50. There are going to be different areas that people at any given moment can take on or can't. Like you said, when people are down, it might be 90-10. You know, somebody might be having the worst week ever at work. And so a healthy relational way of being would be saying, you know, usually you do all of the morning chores. I'm just going to take it, honey, so that you can just go to work and deal with it. And next week, I know you're going to cover me. So it's about that fairness more than it is about it being equal.
My name is Nathan Schwermann. I'm from Lawrence, Kansas. I've been a client of Alan's for coming on 2 years now, and I really can't recommend his program enough. Alan's always there for me with great advice and holding me accountable every step of the way, and really leading by example. I've grown a lot in his program, but he's grown alongside with me, so I'd really recommend joining up on the program and joining the community.
Do you find that also with like love languages of like, because one of the things I've told my fiance is like, if you're sick, the last thing I'm worried about is my physical touch need being met. It just isn't, it's not realistic for me. Like I would feel guilty.
Yeah.
What have you seen when it comes to the 50-50, particularly with the love languages? That's something Alan and I have talked about a lot, the love languages. So I think a good crossover for that.
Yeah, so love languages are essentially just the different types of intimacy that we all desire with fun names applied to them, right? And so it makes sense that we're not always going to be intimate in every single way. You know, another type of intimacy would be like experiential intimacy, which is quality time. And so again, going back to the work example, if somebody has like the biggest project they've ever had and they're going to be gone most of the day, you're not going to experience that. And are you able to recognize this is just a period of time where it makes sense and I'm not going to ask for that right now because there's just no capacity to give it to me. Now, with that being said, the way that people can trust that in those moments is that they are mostly getting what they need most of the time. So yes, your partner is sick this week. So it's easy for you to say, I can lay off on the physical intimacy. I love physical intimacy, but this week they need to rest. I don't need it. But I trust that when they feel better, I'm going to get what I need. Now, if you're never getting what you need, we'll go back to the work example. You're never getting quality time because work is busy every single week and it never ends and your partner never puts boundaries. Then it becomes harder to say, this feels fair. And of course, I don't need to get it at an equal level. So the thing that allows us to create fairness is actually trust, right? Because then I can trust that you're going to do the thing that I want you to do later on, or I can trust that I'm doing all the finances because I trust that you're doing all of the chores. But you need that trust to be there.
Interesting question. So how do you know when you're being unreasonable? Like you personally, if you want to go there vulnerability wise, like how do you know when you have a need that's not being met versus when you're just being unreasonable and being needy? And because honestly, I think some partners, quite frankly, need to learn how to self-soothe and be independent or interdependent, I should say, interdependent. And I know that I find it difficult at times with me sometimes to navigate like when is this a pattern that probably won't change if I don't bring it up vulnerably versus like I'm just being needy and insecure.
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you are being unreasonable, number one, I think most of the time people know that they're being unreasonable a little bit. And if you ever, I have that. You asked if I do, sometimes I'll be upset about something. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, shut up, Liz. Like, just stop yourself right now. You're being a brat. I know that I am, and I can't stop myself. So if anyone listening has that experience, it's totally normal. But then what you need to do is go back after that and self-reflect. Why is this so, and why was that so important that I can only get it from this one person? Am I not fostering enough in my life everywhere else where I'm able to get these needs met? So if, I'm really expecting my partner to hang out with me every single hour of the afternoon, and they're the only person that can give me quality time, and I even sometimes feel unreasonable asking for that, it probably means that somewhere along the line, my own life has gotten a little muddied, and I'm not investing as much as I need to into friends or going to the gym or having a hobby or whatever it is, working on my own work. And so when you notice yourself being unreasonable, when you catch it, asking yourself, where am I not investing enough in having independence, in being able to meet these needs on my own? The other thing that I think is really powerful is like talk with your partner. I ask my husband all the time, if something's not happening, I'm like, I've asked this many times. I feel like it's reasonable. If I do, am I being unreasonable somewhere? What about my request isn't reasonable? And be open to receiving that. Sometimes my husband will say, it actually is not unreasonable. I just haven't made it a priority. I need to own that. I need to take responsibility. And sometimes he'll say, it feels unreasonable because of X, Y, and Z. I work until this time and then this happens. And then again, this comes back to being collaborators. Okay, well, what do we do about it? Because I still have this thing that needs to happen. Does it mean I get somebody else to do it? Does it mean I do it for myself? Do we outsource? Like, how do we get this met? But you can ask people, do you think I'm being unreasonable? Is this why it's not happening? And allow that conversation to open up other solutions.
So you think that me being late to Kevin's meetings is fine then, right?
I don't. I think it's quite unreasonable, Liz.
I'm just joking.
That's how I'm feeling. So
It's unreasonable.
It's unreasonable.
Yeah, exactly.
Alan and I have had a lot of really difficult conversations over the 5 years, however long we've been business partners. And I know in my old relationships, the worst thing to hear was, hey, we need to talk. What is a good way to bring up, and it's a very tactical question because I'm a very tactical human being, but what is a good way to bring up a difficult conversation? Like, how do you start a difficult conversation?
So when you say something like, hey, I need to talk, it's automatically going to put the other person into their threat response. Even if what you want to tell them is they're about to get $1 million bonus or something like that, they are going to look for the danger first. That's what human beings do. And so your conversation is going to suck because their heart rate's going to be elevated. They're going to go into it feeling nervous. They're going to feel flooded. They're not going to have access to their words. I always think giving people a heads up on what you need to talk about is the way to go, even if it's hard. And I don't know where it came from that we withhold that. When it's good news, I think it's like we just don't even think about it. But I do think that there's some thought around like, I should wait until I see them to tell them this thing. But I do think that you need to let people prepare sometimes. It's not fair to be the one with all the info, expecting another person to come into that situation vulnerably, but also knowing something's going to be discussed. So you asked for something tactical, like what you would actually say. And I think it's something like, hey, are you free at 3:00? I would love to talk about, what's been happening with our scheduling. Hey, there's been some thoughts that have been coming up for me about how your employment is going. I would love to chat tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please make sure you come with any questions and I'll try to prepare for the meeting too. But allowing that person insight into what's happening, even if it's a little bit scary.
So we're coming up on it, and I want to respect your time. Kevin and I are big on that. But this actually will probably be a little bit of a challenge. That's totally okay. I have 4 other things written. I'm just going to read them to you quickly. Number
lightning
2
round.
is lightning round. Most common challenges that you see in relationships. The next one is root causes of those challenges. The next one is solutions that you've seen work to overcoming those challenges. And then what's the most important thing our listeners need to understand if they want to be more successful in their relationship? So we'll do one at a time because I don't want to, but it is somewhat of a lightning round if that's okay with you.
Let's do lightning.
Okay, so most common challenges that you've found in intimate relationships in particular.
Skill deficits for communicating, number 1. People just are not skilled. Number 2, that there's fatal flaws in the relationship, which means that they probably should have never gotten together in the first place. And number 3 is betrayals. Those are the most common things that I see.
Wow, so powerful. Okay, I would love to go deeper on those, but we're going to lightning round, Alan. Okay, root causes, that's my self-talk. Root causes of those challenges, in your
Not
opinion.
learning skills at a young age, and obviously just having them modeled to you, so you're just doing whatever you saw. Low self-worth, low self-esteem, so that you get into these fatally flawed relationships where you expect the person to change or something like that. And then root causes of betrayal is often that something was imbalanced in the relationship. Somewhere someone wasn't getting something that they needed, or they didn't feel like they were able to express themselves, communicate. And so that often results in betrayal.
Wow, that's fire. That's so fascinating. I do relationship coaching with my girlfriend as well, and so you're something else. Yeah, it's amazing. We just crossed 60 weeks in a row, so it's exciting. Number 4, little did you know I was a side expert. No, I'm kidding. Number 4 is solutions that you've seen work to each of those.
So definitely learning communication skills, which sounds so basic, but to be more clear, like learning how to not use what's called the 4 horsemen. So getting out of criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, contempt, and instead learning how to express yourself gently and take responsibility instead of deflecting. Super important. Being able to process past hurts in a way that both people are actually vulnerable instead of, bouncing off of each other and saying, well, I didn't really hurt you that bad, or don't worry about it so much. And then solutions to the fatal flaw relationships is that people break up, and that can be a fair solution.
Wow. Powerful. Okay, very last one. Sorry, Kev, to steal the show.
No, that was an Owen Wilson. Wow.
This is the last thing I have written, which is what is the most important thing that our listeners... I'm big on deeper understanding. Kevin's the tactician. What's a deeper understanding that you think is the most important thing for our listeners moving forward in all relationships, especially intimate?
I think it's really important to understand that relationships take more than one person, right? And so you can't have a healthy relationship unless you both are able to be in it. And what that means is that you have to be able to express and advocate for yourself while still making room for the other person. And when relationships aren't going well, it's because one of those things isn't happening. Someone's been forgotten in the equation. And once you can start to care about both people in that equation, that's when relationships can blossom.
Oh,
Hammered that lightning round. Made it look easy.
Yeah, right.
Made it look easy, Liz.
Don't hold me to any of it because there might be nuances I forgot.
That's all right.
Excellent.
A half hour isn't a lot of time, and you added a ton of value. So last question from me. Well, it's a 2-part question. 1, what book would you suggest? We're going to talk about your book. I would recommend your book, but what book would you recommend to people who want to improve their relationships?
I love the book Hold Me Tight. I think it's such a powerful book. It really helps people to understand the importance of being able to be emotionally attuned. And I think if you're going to read any book to help you be more connected with another person, it would be that one.
Now let's talk about the best book ever.
The best book, the one I would actually recommend.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course.
Talk to us about your book and what it is all about and why it is impactful.
Yeah, my book is called I Want This to Work, and it is coming out tomorrow as of recording, so November 30th. And in the book, it is an inclusive guide to navigating your relationship. And by inclusive, I mean two things. One is that it is literally inclusive of all types of couples. Most relationship books on the market do not include any couples other than hetero couples. And that is hurtful, to couples reading that book that don't fit into that. So it is LGBTQ friendly. And I think that part is incredibly important. The other reason that it's inclusive is that relationship skill building and information has been separated into lots of books. So when I've been working with couples, I have to say, to learn about emotional attunement, go to Hold Me Tight. To learn about skills, go to Gottman. To learn about attachment styles, go to Levine. There's all these books for all of these things. But most people are not going to read that many books in a sitting to get their relationship to change. And so I've integrated all of that information into one place so that you can understand how it all fits. And it's written in the same trajectory as couples therapy. So I start by helping you assess what's happening in your relationship. I tell you which conversations you should have. I talk to you about what responsibility you need to take for yourself. And then we end with the fun stuff, which is how to continue your connection.
Sounds wonderful.
Amazing.
You're going to have, you have 2 copies sold right here. And
For sure.
if you're listening, everything will be in the show notes. Make sure you follow Liz. She puts a ton of value on her social media. Liz listens. One of my favorites. I know Alan's favorites as well. Liz, we're so grateful for you spending the time with us today. Thank you so very much, helping our listeners get to the next level of their relationships.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Liz, thank you so much for coming on. This was one of the most aligned interviews we've ever done. Aligned interviews are actually much more challenging than Kevin and I thought. This one was unbelievable. Thank you so much. And we cannot wait to connect with you further.
Oh, it was so nice to talk to both of you. I enjoyed it so much.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. I hope you have a great afternoon.
You too.
You as well.
Bye.
Talk soon.
Bye.